The fairy tale cracked at the exact moment the palace stopped whispering and started drawing lines, and suddenly the love story that sold the world on modern royalty was drowning in questions nobody thought would ever be said out loud. For years, the image was airtight: red carpets, royal waves, soft-focus documentaries, and two children presented as symbols of a new era. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle weren't just a couple. They were a brand, a bridge between Hollywood shine and Windsor tradition. But behind the polished photos and carefully worded interviews, doubts had been simmering in the corners of the internet, dismissed as noise, brushed off as cruelty, buried under glossy PR and sympathetic headlines. Then came the filing: quiet, legal, precise. An unidentified woman, referred to in documents as DL, stepped out of the shadows with a claim so explosive it didn't just target a marriage or a reputation, it brushed right up against the foundations of royal lineage. She alleged she had carried the Sussex children as a surrogate under private agreements, complete with medical records, contracts, and even what she claimed was personal correspondence. The palace didn't confirm any of it. They didn't need to. What shook observers was that they didn't laugh it off either. They went silent, and royal silence is never empty, it's loaded. Behind those stone walls, the mood reportedly shifted from irritation to containment, because this wasn't tabloid drama anymore, this was paperwork, courts, offers. Words like verification and protocol started floating around royal reporters like a storm warning nobody wanted to say out loud. Then, in a move that stunned royal watchers, a senior royal stepped forward to speak, not with accusations, but with distance. Calm, controlled, and ice-cold in tone, the message was simple: this is not a matter for the crown, this is a matter for the courts. On the surface, it sounded neutral. Underneath, it was a withdrawal. A subtle but unmistakable step back from the Sussex narrative, like the institution was quietly saying, this story no longer belongs to us. And that's when everything tilted. Because just days before these legal rumblings went public, Meghan had shared a lighthearted hospital video meant to celebrate motherhood. In another context, it might have been seen as playful. But now, with allegations swirling, critics online tore it apart frame by frame, comparing it to their own late-stage pregnancy experiences, arguing about what looked real and what didn't. The internet did what it always does: it turned uncertainty into spectacle. Inside Montecito, according to sources and speculation swirling in media circles, the reaction was shock mixed with disbelief. The expectation had allegedly been that any wild claims would fade like so many before. Instead, this one arrived wrapped in legal language and an offer to testify under oath. That changes the temperature. That makes lawyers sit up straight. Back in the UK, royal insiders reportedly described emergency meetings, not about emotions, but about procedure. Succession isn't built on vibes, they say, it's built on documentation. Birth records, signatures, verification trails. The monarchy, for all its pageantry, runs on paperwork older than most countries. And if there's even a whisper that paperwork doesn't line up, the machine doesn't panic, it audits. Publicly, though, the palace face remains serene. Engagements continued. Smiles stayed fixed. No direct shots fired. But small signals started stacking up. Subtle wording changes, careful phrasing about the line of succession, a refusal to be dragged into a media back and forth. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Meanwhile, Meghan's brand, long intertwined with motherhood, authenticity, and storytelling, began to feel the tremors. Planned appearances reportedly shifted. Projects were said to be quietly delayed, not canceled with a bang, just paused. In Hollywood, that kind of silence is its own headline. Harry, according to commentators and unnamed sources quoted across outlets, was said to be furious and frightened in equal measure, not just at the allegations, but at the idea of his children being pulled into a constitutional conversation they never asked for. Because beyond the gossip and the palace strategy, there are two kids at the center of a storm built by adults, institutions, and a media ecosystem that feeds on ambiguity. And still, the palace did not attack. They distanced. Over and over, the message looped back to the same cool refrain: legal matters must be resolved in legal arenas. The crown will not speculate. The crown will not validate unverified claims. It was a masterclass in saying a lot while technically saying nothing at all. But emotionally, the impact was brutal. For Meghan, who built her post-royal identity around reclaiming her voice, this was a fight she couldn't win with a podcast or a speech. Documentation doesn't clap back. Courts don't care about narrative arcs. If proof exists, it speaks. If it doesn't, that silence speaks too. For Harry, the boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the world, the idea of another deeply personal chapter being dissected by institutions and headlines must have felt like history repeating with sharper teeth. Only this time, he wasn't the child at the center. His own children were. And for the monarchy, the calculation was ruthless but simple. Survival of the institution always outranks the comfort of the individuals orbiting it. Feelings are private. Protocol is permanent. So the stage was set. A legal claim on one side, an ancient institution on the other. And in the middle, a couple who once promised to rewrite the royal rulebook now facing the possibility that the oldest rules of all, lineage, proof, documentation, might be the ones that refuse to bend. The tears, insiders say, weren't just about reputation. They were about realizing that once the palace steps back, it rarely steps forward again. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. What began as whispers of surrogacy and contested lineage quickly transformed into something much bigger, a constitutional battle. Behind closed doors at Windsor Castle, the tension was palpable. The palace was holding its breath, watching as the game shifted from scandal to something much more chilling, verification. The stakes were no longer about tabloid allegations or celebrity gossip, but the very foundation of the monarchy itself. King Charles, who had inherited not just the throne but centuries of precedent, had always played a careful hand. But this wasn't just about protecting the image of his family. This was about ensuring the survival of a centuries-old institution that had always been defined by one thing above all, the truth of bloodlines. At Windsor, meetings had been called at the highest levels. Prince William, Princess Anne, and even the quiet but deadly effective Duchess Sophie were reportedly summoned for a round of intense discussions. Insiders were tight-lipped, but sources inside the palace indicated that Charles himself had grown deeply concerned about what this would mean for the monarchy's legacy. Lineage isn't sentimental, Princess Anne reportedly said during one of those closed-door meetings. If we let this narrative stand, what does that say about our future? What does it say about the very legitimacy of the crown? The question wasn't just about Harry and Meghan's kids, it was about the future of royal succession. And if any cracks were left unchecked, the monarchy would be at risk of fracture. The British royal family had always been a symbol of unity, the unity of a nation, the unity of history. To entertain a narrative of contested birthrights could leave that foundation in tatters. By the time the palace issued its decision, the world knew the clock was ticking. From the outside, it looked like a slow-motion crash, but behind the scenes, the machinery was in overdrive. Lawyers were sifting through every scrap of documentation, DNA tests were on the table, and a privacy agreement from a Swiss legal chamber was getting more attention than it had ever seen before. It wasn't just about what had happened in 2025 or 2026, though. The palace had a longer view. A decades-old protocol, known as the Red Clarification, had been put into motion. Documents traced back to the reign of Queen Elizabeth II had surfaced, revealing a meticulous preemptive protocol that seemed, at first glance, like something out of a history book. But to the royals, it was a lifeline. Any future children of Prince Harry must have their birth details fully verified before being included in the royal line, the document stated, as chilling as it was precise. No loopholes, no exceptions. The monarchy had anticipated a scenario like this, and in some ways, it was almost as if they'd seen it coming all along. That document, signed by the late Queen herself, laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The palace wasn't just scrambling to protect their image, they were legally fortifying their position. If Archie and Lilith's lineage couldn't be verified, their very existence in the royal line could be questioned. Princess Catherine, calm as ever, was reported to have leaned into her role during this critical time. While Sophie held the public line, Catherine was working quietly, strategically behind the scenes. She had already made it clear where her stance was. She was not one to give a speech, but insiders were certain she understood the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about optics, she reportedly said. This is about truth. Her words would come to define the decision that followed. While the palace issued an official statement denying any intention to strip titles immediately, the world could feel the tension. The idea of freezing Archie and Lilith's titles was not just a threat, it was a reflection of what could come if the verification process couldn't meet royal standards. For Meghan and Harry, however, the storm was just beginning. As rumors swirled, they reportedly began reaching out to select members of the family. Princess Eugenie, Zara Tindall. They needed allies, and fast, but there was one thing missing from their strategy: action. The silence from Montecito became increasingly deafening. Sources close to the Sussexes claimed that Meghan was devastated, unsure how to respond. But no formal rebuttal ever came. No cease and desist, no challenge to the documents. Just a sense that the clock was ticking faster than they had expected. Inside the UK, the general public was divided. Some sympathized with the Sussexes, angry at what they saw as a royal institution attacking a family's private narrative. But for many others, the message was clear. The monarchy had to stand firm on its rules. Titles and birthright couldn't just be handed out based on sentiment. They had to be earned. And so, the palace dug in its heels. King Charles had made his decision, and it was one he wasn't prepared to change, regardless of who it hurt. In California, the reality was sinking in. Meghan and Harry had long fought for a voice, a platform, a place in the world. Now, with all eyes on them, that platform was slipping away. They were facing an uphill battle, one that wouldn't be won with a podcast or an emotional video. For the first time since they had left the royal fold, the crown wasn't just dismissing them. It was challenging their very existence within the royal structure. Behind Buckingham Palace's high gates, conversations were reaching a crescendo. Legal documents, contracts, and even secretive DNA testing were on the table. Harry and Meghan were no longer just fighting the media, they were fighting the very institution that once gave them the world. And as the final decision loomed, insiders whispered one thing: the crown always wins. But the price it demands might be more than anyone can pay. What comes next? History will judge, but the game of royal succession is one no one can afford to lose. No one can afford to lose. No one can afford to lose. No one